try this. Try this. If you feel better, take the next step. As a teacher, I also like to teach that way. I say, I'm going to teach you some Kriya Yoga. I'll suggest how you can breathe and energize your body. If it doesn't work, then try another teacher. That's the best way, because your direct experience is the only thing that counts. Of course, in the beginning, you have to have a little bit of trust until your nervous system develops enough for you to actually experience some inner silence. So in the beginning, you have to demonstrate a little bit of faith. This time, I'm going to talk about right action. Think about this. In a world with so many thieves, so many crooks, so much dishonesty and violence, somebody talks to you about right action, proper action. The question comes up is, who for? If half the world is stealing, why should I pay attention to my own proper actions? My answer to you is that your subconscious mind picks up everything you think, do, and say. In other words, if you directly kill an animal, the suffering of that animal is absorbed by your subconscious mind, and somehow it gets into your self-image. So you might not be aware of that. You might feel that you're very, very clever because you went deer hunting and you hunted some meat for your dinner. So that may feel very clever. But every time you shoot a deer, the suffering of the animal penetrates your subconscious mind, and it starts to pollute your own self-image. You start to feel subconsciously that I am not a good person. So when the Buddha talks about right action, he's not giving you the 5 commandments. He's saying, I'm going to suggest something to you as a kind uncle. Try it. Try proper action in your life and see what happens to your life. What happens in your life is that your subconscious mind starts to get a very nice image of you as a human being. You start to feel like I am a wholesome human being with integrity and love. That goes into your self-image. 80% of the world might be killing and stealing, but you know inside that you are a very solid person who is full of love and compassion. The active state of compassion in Sanskrit is called karuna. Karuna means an intentional state of compassion and love. I remember years and years ago, for a little while, I was living in Portland, Oregon. It was about 12 midnight. I was sleeping, and outside my window, I heard a man abusing his girlfriend. And I think he was twisting her arm, and she started to express pain. And the neighbor, my neighbor, jumped out and said, "What are you doing? Help, help, everybody help." And this woman who jumped out acted as an agent of justice. So she was in a state of karuna. It wasn't her business. She just jumped in and protected justice. You see, I think you'll agree with me. The biggest danger facing all of us is apathy. In other words, a dictator comes, we decide to look the other way and go to the movies. Or people start to run out of food. We say, it's okay, I'm making $200,000. So as long as I have my BMW, it's okay. It hasn't hit my house yet. We're all guilty of that. The biggest danger facing all of us is apathy. And how do we think that dictators come to power? It's apathy. Everybody looks the other way because it hasn't hit your home yet. When the Buddha talks about right action, he's talking about no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no drug abuse or use of intoxicants. And I want to break these down into the idea of protecting lives, the idea of generosity, responsible sexual behavior, consuming mindfully, and protecting justice. Let's talk about some of these. First of all, protecting lives. You know that some of us have a lifestyle that is constantly killing. If you think about somebody who loves filet mignon and big steaks 3 times a week, this person is constantly killing by just living. You know, I'm not calling this person a murderer directly, but ask yourself a question. Ask yourself, is my lifestyle constantly creating killing? I have to tell you a funny story, not so funny. In my backyard, there used to be a big, huge chicken. And this chicken was so large, it used to chase our German Shepherd. And somebody named this chicken Henry. So one night, we were very hungry. We were at the table, and they brought some chicken with peas. So everybody was about to dig in, and somebody said, "That's Henry." And everybody started feeling bad. You know why? Because the chicken now had a name. Let's get back to the original talk. Is your lifestyle regularly creating killing? You know, 3 steaks a week is just supporting more killing. When the Buddha talks about protecting life, he's talking about protecting animals, humans, vegetables, and minerals. Because if we dig the earth full of holes and there's nothing left for our grandchildren, then we're also killing the minerals. If we're building condo complexes in the Amazon, we're killing the oxygen, killing the trees, and then there's nothing left for 2 generations from now. Same thing with the coral of the seas, because the fish are disappearing. Are you somebody who would like to protect life? Protecting the life of humans, animals, plants, and minerals. Here we have to bring up one word. It's called mindfulness. In Buddhism and the Vedantas and Kriya Yoga, we say mindfulness should be chaperoning. Mindfulness should be accompanying every thought, word, and action. Let's say that you really, really like roses. So you go to a rose garden and this beautiful pink rose grabs your attention. If you approach that pink rose with mindfulness, you don't just yank it up. Because you're so mindful, you realize that this rose is alive. So then, if you really want that rose, you have to establish some sort of relationship before you yank it. It's impossible for you to have mindfulness and just break that rose in half without any warning, without anything. Same with your treatment of animals and, of course, other human beings. So karuna means an active state of compassion. You know, when you watch the evening news and there's just news of wars and protests and mass killings. It's like somebody's piercing your heart because you are in a state of compassion, karuna, instead of apathy. I know it hurts, but you're being a very, very big person. And you can do something about it. I tried something in Tehran one day. There was an empty field outside my apartment full of plastic bottles. I went downstairs and I started picking up some plastic bottles. My neighbor from the 5th floor saw that I was picking plastic bottles. And then he came down and started collecting plastic bottles. And then the lady across the street. So I'm not calling myself a hero. I'm saying you take one step towards protecting life, and you never know what your neighbor is going to do. That's what I'm suggesting. Mindfulness. Instead of breaking the rose off, ask for permission or just admire it. So no killing and no stealing. Sometimes we steal property that belongs to other people. Imagine that our generation starts to ruin a national park, or that our generation is responsible for making a river go dry. So if I and you are responsible for destroying a national park, we are stealing this national park from the next generation. Let's also talk about exploitation. The Buddha says, do not make profit by exploiting the suffering of another person. At this point in history, we have multinational corporations that go to a very poor country and they find people who make handicraft art. So you go to a remote village in India, pay 50 cents to somebody making handicraft, and they make a beautiful bedspread, a quilt, and then you bring it to your shopping center in Austria or the United States, and you sell it for $238. And there, the Buddha says, you are profiting through the suffering of somebody else. For example, when we sell women and children across the borders, that's making a profit over the suffering of somebody else. And now let's talk about responsible behavior. One of the most irresponsible behaviors is sexual misconduct. Everybody on this phone call in this session knows that when we abuse somebody sexually, they suffer for years and years and years. Because the one who gets sexually abused, their subconscious mind gets full of shame. And then that shame becomes suffering for years and years and years. So we can literally destroy a human being through sexual abuse. And in terms of sexual relationships, the Buddha says, if there's no love, there's nothing. In other words, love making without love is just using the other person like some object, like a doll, and then you throw them away after you're satisfied, or the other person does the same to you, or you do it to each other. You're both using each other as objects. So then, in a sense, you're both getting hurt. See, the main thing in this talk is that your soul understands everything that's going on. So we take two people that go to a club, and both of them are sexually promiscuous, And then they do some lovemaking without any love. And then they throw each other away at the end of the evening. Here, spirituality says, at the level of your soul, you both understand that you used each other and there was not one drop of love in the lovemaking. And even though you enjoyed each other for 20 minutes, something deeper got hurt in the soul. In other words, the next day when you're walking downtown, there's some inkling in the depths of your subconscious mind. Somehow you're not proud of last night because you used somebody and threw their body away. By the way, I'm not a priest. I'm just explaining some of the teachings about right action. No killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, no drug abuse. Let us now talk about generosity. See if you can find one child or one person or one animal that needs you, and then be very generous with your time. I mean, imagine a 5-year-old child. There's so much that they don't know, or a 13-year-old. They're just becoming experienced in life and they need your guidance. You have so much wisdom by now. Imagine how much guidance you can lend to a 13-year-old who's falling in love for the first time. I'm not talking about your pessimism, I'm talking about your guidance. I would have loved to have been guided by an adult who had a lot of time for me. I'm absolutely in love with my father. He was a very, very good man. I adored him. But he was working very, very hard. So I'm asking you the question. Can you think of an animal or a child, some innocent being that needs your time? Because, even when you spend time with your animals and your plants, they start to flourish. Imagine spending some time with a child. I mean, the Buddha says when you spend time with somebody, your eyes must turn into compassionate eyes. When that 6-year-old is talking, your eyes must turn into compassionate eyes. The Buddha says 10 minutes of complete listening to somebody is the greatest act of love ever possible. He says you can absolutely cure somebody physically, psychologically, emotionally by giving them your absolute time for 10 minutes. It's very, very deep healing. That's a talk about generosity and also some resources. If you have some resources, then find the right place to be generous. When I was living in New York City, every winter, we would see people, homeless people in the street, starving because there were some very cold winters. So you would be walking in the sidewalks and you would see a dead, frozen person. And next to that dead, frozen person, there would be containers of food that restaurants had to legally throw away. They were not allowed to give their food to the homeless people outside the restaurant. This is 1979. I know Ben lives near New York right now. Maybe the laws have changed. In 1979, the restaurants had to throw away their food, and there were people starving. We're talking about generosity. And think very hard. How can you be generous with your time this week? How can you be generous with some food that you're about to throw away? Pair of shoes. Okay? Next, the Buddha talks about consuming mindfully. Think about the very rich nations of the world. The amount of consumption is really, really scary. Now, I know some friends on this phone call, you're seeing one side of the world. So if you're seeing just the well-off side of the world, that may not strike you as unusual. But if you're traveling back and forth between New Delhi and Irvine, California, then it just becomes really strange. I was teaching in the city of Dubai. You know, Dubai is basically a consumer society. I was looking for a part for a used Volkswagen that was only 5 years old. And the guy laughed at me. He said, "We don't have 5-year-old cars here. We just ship them out to Africa. We don't want them." And then think about the United States, you know. I'm not making anybody guilty. The Buddha wants you to think about wastefulness. You know, this formula of more, 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 more is guaranteed to destroy the human race. Because think about it. We're all living on one piece of rock called the earth. And the attitude is more, 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 more. And this business of more, more, more cannot wind up in a very good place if you think about it. Because we have to bury nuclear waste. And then we're throwing away all this food. And then we're putting all these pesticides and fertilizers in the farms to produce more, more, more. The formula of give me more, it's a very destructive formula. It's not going to wind up in a good place. So the Buddha points towards one of you as a human being and says, this week, how can you consume mindfully? In other words, consume so that you have a lot of happiness, but consume so that you don't harm your health. And consume so you don't harm the river, the national park, and the rest of society. You know, the division in the US society right now between the multi-billionaires and the ones who aren't being heard. What is the problem there? Give me more. So that's destroying the middle class. Mindful consumption, even when we're eating dinner. Tonight, when we eat dinner, each of us, after we've had about 3 spoonfuls, we're going to come to the bridge between the two nostrils and realize that we're breathing. And then we're just going to ask one question. Am I eating mindfully or not? Am I already full or not? This is not a diet. Eat as much as you'd like. But in the middle of the meal, just ask one question. Am I already full or not? Because, you know, a dog can eat with his saliva. So if you overfill their dish, they may blow up. So in the middle of your meal, ask yourself, am I full yet? If you're not, keep eating. And by the way, breathe. Breathe while you're eating. And suddenly the speed of your eating changes. Mindful consumption. And then wastefulness. What is the area of waste in your life? At one point, I was taking unused pieces of white paper from my Hewlett-Packard printer to jot down a few notes. And then I realized that each piece of paper has two sides. So I'm not a poor person, but I realized that a lot of my notes from 5, 6 years ago still had one white side on the paper. So for my scribbling, for my daily scribbling, I just use the other white side of unused paper. And I'm sure some of you do some of these things. So the Buddha wants you to think about wastefulness, unnecessary wastefulness. Let's also talk about gratitude, because we're talking about right action. This week, find somebody who has truly given you unbelievable love. Do you know who loves you? It's the one person that is sharing your dream and excited about your dream. It's the one person who's always happy to see you. It's the one person that has no hidden agendas for you. And then turn to that person, hopefully in their presence. Look into their eyes and say, look, I just want to say this at least once. Look into their eyes and say, I really appreciate your love. And that is something huge for your loved one to hear. How many times do we turn to somebody like this and say, you know what? I was just thinking about this today, and I'm really happy that you're here. It means the world. By the way, you can say it to your dog. The dog will understand. We all pick up on each other's energy. Your flowers will understand. There are people who make their flowers thrive. The final word here is that our ego wants to ignore the fact that we have choice. Let's put it this way. The one choice that we don't have is consequence. What I'm trying to say is whether we act apathetically and not take any steps, or whether we act, in either case, the consequences are coming. Because we live in a world where the atoms are constantly moving. The building block of life is the atom, and the atom is constantly moving. And therefore, consequences are constantly coming. We cannot avoid consequences. And therefore, why not take a choice, a mindful choice, so that you create the consequence? The ego would rather believe that we don't have a choice. So somebody says, I just celebrated my 77th birthday. From now on, everything is downhill, so I have no choice. And the fact is, at 10:07 a.m. on a Saturday morning, you have more than 1,000,000 choices in terms of what you think, what you speak, what you do. Even at 97 years of age, you always have choice.